Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We want to thank you for taking some time to listen about data-driven marketing, what techniques you can use to grow your business, using the data you have access to, and hopefully you'll find some good content in here.
Yes, thank you, Eric. My name is Jenny, and just wanted to quickly introduce myself and thank you for allowing me to fulfill my dream of being a podcast host for the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, both Jenny and I are on the client success team here at Retention Science. Together, we work with some of the world's most recognized brands. Hopefully, we'll share some of our knowledge and insights with you today. As a quick background, Retention Science is an AI-powered marketing platform that helps brands connect with their consumers to help deliver the right message at the right time, every time. We work with some major brands, including several Procter & Gamble properties, Draper James, Distilled, and many others. Throughout the webinar today, please feel free to go into the chat program and ask some questions. At the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A section, so feel free to continue to ask. During the presentation today, we're going to be discussing some of the following topics. What data to pay attention to, as well as some specific industry trends, a simple formula that we put together to help move some levers up and down to help forecast growth, some available data and how to understand it, and we'll also get into a few examples within the Retention Science platform and show you how you can leverage ReSci for real-time optimization. Looking at this slide, you might be thinking to yourself, what does baseball have to do with email marketing? I'm sure Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill said the same thing when they were cast for the movie Moneyball. Brad Pitt played the character, if you guys aren't familiar, of the GM for the 2002 Oakland A's. And Jonah Hill played the role of the assistant GM, Peter Brand. Due to the franchise's extremely limited budget for players, Peter Brand used what was called a sabermetric approach to scouting and analyze players. Basically, he was using the relevant data from in-game activity to answer some specific questions. The A's discovered that on-base percentage and slugging percentage were better indicators than the offensive successes, rather than just looking at batting averages, RBIs, and stolen bases. We'll be doing the same thing today by looking at the metrics available to you and how you can use that data to make educated decisions regarding your ECRM programs.
Yeah, when looking at your data, it's super important to understand both industry trends as well as past performance from within your own ECRM program. So what we've done is we've broken down some general industry trends here based on specific lifestyle marketing stages. Typically, your broadcast messages, so those are like your blasts, will have a lower engagement rate than your more targeted automated stages, such as cart abandonment or something super targeted like a back-in-stock alert. While these numbers may not be exactly the same of yours, I do think it's good to have a measure here and a benchmark of where you are today, and then work to improve your engagement metrics across your entire program.
Like I mentioned earlier, we put together an easily digestible formula to help grow your ECRM program. Driving revenue can be broken down to something simple like this: growing your consumer base, increasing your overall engagement rates, including open rates, click rates, conversion rates, and including your average order value. Combining all three of these together will result in steady and consistent revenue growth. I actually like to model it out with the brands that I work with and show them if everything else remains constant, but we increase the list size from, say, maybe 500,000 to 550,000, how would that affect top line revenue? It's pretty easy to build out a spreadsheet in Excel to use this model. We can use the same concept for open rates, conversion rates, and AOV to help forecast revenue as well.
Yeah, thanks. In this section, we're going to look at your existing data, KPIs, set goals, and demonstrate how you can optimize things. Looking at how the metrics play out across the formula, we can begin to uncover some really cool learnings and start to make some informed decisions. In this slide, for example, we're going to grow our customer base and our engagement rates, and we notice that they're both up as well, but our AOV and revenue numbers are dropping. So that's kind of curious. Looking at this, if I were looking at this for a brand, I would say that this tells me that the offer in the first message may not be resonating with consumers. So there are maybe issues with the creative, or maybe even difficulties on the website while completing a purchase. So those are all things to look at. This next example shows that we are growing our list, so that's great, but our engagement rates, AOV, and revenue are still declining. So, what's that about? Typically, this may be the result of poor lead quality. So I would probably tell a client at this point to look further into how they're acquiring new consumers. Are you using something like Facebook lead ads? Are you offering free samples in exchange for an opt-in? Are you running maybe a sweepstakes that isn't netting you the quality consumers that you're looking for? A few other things to look at when your engagement rates are dropping are subject lines, email frequency, and deliverability. So for subject lines, for example, a lot of brands spend so much time, really valuable time, developing the perfect creative, which is great. And then they'll come up with the subject line at the last minute. But it's good to remember that other than brand recognition, your subject line is the most important factor in getting the consumer to open your email. So it's important to test multiple subject lines and get a good understanding of what resonates with your consumers. Short versus long, emojis versus no emojis, personalization. I have one brand that literally they have one emoji as a subject line and it does really well, but that's just that brand and that story, right? So, and then in terms of email frequency, like how often are you communicating with your consumers? If you're a daily deal type of site, then yeah, it's good to send every day. If not, you may want to look at how frequently you've been mailing to your consumers and maybe tweak things a little bit, reduce the frequency, give your consumers the opportunity to opt down instead of completely opting out. And then lastly, deliverability is an often overlooked but super important element of your email marketing program. So if your consumers aren't getting emails into their inbox, then they're not going to be converting, obviously. And lastly, if all your metrics look good, it's not a time to sit back and relax. Now is the time to optimize your program even further. So let's focus on increasing AOV. Later, we're going to get into a few examples that will provide you with some strategies on growing your AOV. Another program optimization you should focus on is how else can you continue to grow your list, right? So one of the things I like to recommend is Facebook lookalike audiences. So if you find your best consumers, based on email engagement, maybe these are your top spenders, you can send that list to Facebook and then they can identify certain data points for each of these consumers and uncover some hidden elements that are similar across these consumers. So then they will use, spooky technology to look for other consumers across Facebook network that have similar interests, and you can target those consumers. So, I'm sure you've all heard that saying that it's much easier to keep a customer than it is to acquire a new one. So now's the time to turn those one-time purchasers into super valuable repeat customers and those 2 to 3 time consumers into loyal consumers and brand ambassadors that will continue to support your brand.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jenny. That's some really good information there. Typically, when we work with our brands, we want to tell them to set a goal. And what is our goal for our program? What's our goal for each individual program project? So I like to use this acronym here, the SMART goals. So whenever you're coming up with your monthly, quarterly, yearly goals, you can just follow along. You want to make sure that they're specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and time-based. So for this example, we want to increase our list size by 20% over the next quarter. So if you look at that goal, it's definitely specific and measurable. Is it achievable or reasonable? That's to be determined. We also want to see how we've been trending over time, as well as what actions can we put into place to help drive traffic to our site and ultimately grow our list. And then time-based, that's covered here too. We've got the next 3 months to achieve our goal. Now let's take all of this and apply it to our revenue playbook that we talked about earlier to help grow your revenue using the data. In part 1 of the playbook, we want to grow our consumer base. Before we focus on the first lever of growing the consumer base, let's set a baseline. Let's take where we are today with regards to list size, number of daily opt-ins, number of unsubscribes, etc. And then let's work to grow the list by 20%. While it's important to grow the consumer list, we also want to spend some time today focus on the run versus fly sections of this slide. We want to ensure that the email addresses we're acquiring are quality, and they're also engaging with your brand. Here, we wanted to provide a few key points to keep in mind when analyzing your current list. First, what's your current net opt-in rate? How many consumers are you acquiring each month, and how many are unsubscribing? If more consumers are opting out than opting in, we definitely have a problem. So we'll show you some recommendations to help you out there. A few other points to keep in mind here are the quality of consumers that are opting in, ensuring your website is optimized for signups, and also ensure that you're using other channels to acquire email addresses too.
Yeah, I love that run and fly chart. It's really important to have the right consumers. It's great. This chart is great as it shows cumulative list growth in the gray line and then daily opt-ins in blue and opt-outs in orange. Obviously you want to keep the cumulative number and you want to have that continue to grow, but you also want to keep an eye on your unsubs to ensure that they're not trending upwards. Here you'll see a spike in unsubs in November, December, but obviously that's to be expected. We all send so many more emails during this period, so that's pretty typical.
At the end of the day, you just want to ensure that you're growing your consumer base effectively and with the right consumers. So we put together some questions here that'll help understand your consumer base. As I mentioned a minute ago, is my net opt-in rate growing? Are my consumers converting? How many consumers are not only converting, but are purchasing 2 times, 3 times, or even more? What's the average lifetime value across all consumers? Do different actions affect the lifetime value? A good example here is, let's just say you have either an online quiz on your website or you do some kind of progressive profiling. If so, can you determine if the lifetime value is higher for the consumers that provide you with this additional information and in return receive more personalized content from you? We also want to make sure that your website's optimized for signups. Do you have a pop-up? Do you have a footer form on all pages? Is there an account registration? If so, are you capturing opt-ins there also? And lastly, when a consumer is checking out, do you ask them to opt in there as well?
Another thing to keep in mind with your consumer list is that typically, 70 to 75% of most email subscribers are inactive. So list hygiene is a good thing to keep in mind, and it's not just about removing those undeliverables and bounces and unsubs, but it also requires re-engaging inactive subscribers and the tricky task of asking them if they still want to receive your emails. I know that it's a little scary to think about getting people to unsub, but it's necessary in today's email climate. When you consider, as I mentioned, that 70 to 75% of those email subscribers are inactive, it becomes a waste of resources and money, and it hurts the overall deliverability of your list to continue to reach out to them. When you remove inactives and non-responders, there are a number of pretty cool added benefits to your email campaign. So in addition to a better deliverability rate, you will actually have lowered costs and increased ease of segmentation and analysis. So you'll just be looking at a cleaner data set overall, basically. Not only are you're paying to send to these subscribers, you don't want to waste your time managing a larger email list, and then you're penalized for sending too many emails that are left unopened and unengaged. So we want your list to grow, but we also want to ensure that these consumers are purchasing from you as well. So that's obviously a very important metric. If you have the ability to do so, one of the things that I like to walk my clients through is understand, out of the number of total consumers that we do have opted in, how many of them have never purchased, and how many of them have purchased once or twice or are really loyal consumers and brand ambassadors.
Great information. The second part of the playbook that we have here, we want to start focusing on maximizing consumer engagement. For the second lever here of our formula, we want to get our consumers to engage more with the content. In this example, similar to what we talked about earlier with those SMART goals, we want to increase our consumer engagement by 20% by the end of the year. So here we want to focus on some of the standard metrics you're used to, such as open rates, click rates, conversion rates. But along with those standard metrics, you also want to look at, how long does it take your consumers to make their first purchase? What's the repeat purchase rate? How many of your consumers are purchasing more than one time? Thinking about what Jenny mentioned a few minutes ago, we'll want to know what percentage of your consumers are active. How many have opened or clicked on an email within the past 90 days? And then using some of the data within retention science, you're able to view what the lifetime value is for your consumers broken down by acquisition source too. So you'll know which acquisition methods are performing and which ones you should optimize.
Oh, I love this slide. This is a great slide that shows how email and send volume is completely correlated with revenue. For this particular brand, I'd say that they should focus on sending a bit more frequently as they see a huge spike in revenue each time they mail to their consumers. On average, 49% of consumers have said that they'd like to receive promotional emails on a weekly basis from their favorite brand. So that's really where that knowing your consumer comes in handy. We not only want to look at email send volume and revenue, we also want to add another dimension into the analysis as well, which is engagement rate. So if you increase send frequency from 1 time a week to 2 times a week, or even more, remember what I mentioned, like reaching out to those engaged consumers, you also want to ensure that the engagement rates don't drop off with the increased volume. So this brand, for example, did a pretty good job of increasing their send volume from about 500,000 a week to about 1.5 million per week, but their open rates remained pretty steady. So obviously they did something right.
Yeah, a lot of consumers or a lot of brands have the mentality of, more is better, and we want to continue to send more and more emails, but we want to make sure and do it smartly over time, and to make sure that not only if we're sending more, are the consumers still finding the content relevant and meaningful for them. So now that we've gotten our consumers to open the emails, we want to ensure that we're sending them relevant content. So in this particular slide, it's just an example of some top selling products for a particular brand. If we take this top selling products and then we put it together next to one of their recent campaigns, you'll notice that they aren't marketing to any of their top selling products. They're not promoting any of the products that their consumers typically purchase. If instead, I created a quick mock-up of what their creative could look like if they're using data that's available to them and they market it to their top selling products, giving your consumers more personalized and relevant content will significantly increase the likelihood of purchasing from you and the remaining loyal consumer and coming back with your brand.
Yeah, many times there are different opinions on what types of offers perform better than others. And this is where experimentation really helps. Instead of simply guessing, you can let the data from your experiments tell you what your customers actually want. So here's a well-known brand that performed a test with us over the holidays. So they offered $50 off, 25% off, and also buy one, get one offer. So we found over and over again that the largest dollar off discount wasn't always the one that converted the highest. So, one of the things that I like to say is, why throw money away when you don't have to? That's not necessarily what your consumers are going to respond to. Instead, let's do some testing and then see what the data tells us about your specific brand.
Super, super important. This is kind of a more complex slide, but alongside with some of the standard metrics you're used to, like we talked about open rates, click rates, conversion rates, we also want to make sure that your consumers are not only buying from you repeatedly. Here we're going to focus on how long does it take your consumers to make their first purchase, as well as repeat purchasers, and what percentage of your consumers are making more than one purchase. It's extremely valuable to know that on average, the time to first purchase is typically under 6 days. So for this particular brand, 5.9 days. And then it takes about 25 days for a consumer to make their second purchase. Knowing that information, you could have an automated campaign go out about 15 to 20 days after the first purchase and try to get them to purchase again. The data also shows that about 26% of this brand's consumers become paying customers, and then the time between purchases decreases as they purchase more, and the AOV increases for each purchase. So here on this chart here, 74% of the consumers have churned before they made their first purchase. Then they have the highest churn rate between the first and second purchase. And then you see at the bottom what the average order value is. So as we get them to purchase more, the time between purchase reduces and the churn reduces. So like I said, we can see the highest churn occurs between the first and second purchase, where almost 78% of consumers don't come back and purchase again. Maybe we can offer some type of incentive that goes out to first-time purchasers and gets them to convert again for a second time.
This was a really great insight and experiment that we found for a well-known grooming brand using this kind of data. So we were actually able to see that the highest percentage of churn for this brand occurred after the third purchase. So, knowing that, the brand decided to offer a fourth order free promotion, and that actually helped to significantly reduce churn because they were really targeting the moment of the most churn.
Referring back to our playbook, this is the part 3, the final lever of the revenue playbook. We now want to start focus on increasing the average order value. Here's a quick peek at the formula again. We've already discussed growing our consumer base, maximizing engagement rates. Now focus on AOV. Thinking back to our SMART goals again, here we want to focus on growing our AOV from $45 to $60 by the end of the year. So I can't stress that enough with regards to the goals. They have to be attainable, and there has to be a quantifiable metric. So I can't just say, oh, I want to increase my open rates, or I want to grow my list. We have to have a goal in place, and so this really, really helps us do that. The simple definition for average order value is the total number of revenue divided by the number of orders, or conversions, however your terminology is. You also want to look at the historical metrics to see if your AOV has been growing or declining over time, and also look to see if there are any specific factors that contributed to the AOV for a specific campaign. Maybe you had a 50% off campaign that drove a ton of revenue, but ended up reducing your AOV. Maybe you offered an incentive at a specific threshold to help drive increased AOV as well.
So in the retention science platform, for example, you have the ability to see what products are typically sold together, that lift. So this could help with creating bundles, for example. Many of our brands will take this information and give it to their buyers and fulfillment teams so that then they can use the data to identify what products they should be selling together. So if you go to the next slide. Yep. Here are a few examples, for example, from Burst Oral Care, there's Native Deodorant and others, and they've showcased how, they've put some products together into bundles based on the data of this, item lift that we've seen previously. And here's a few more from our friends at Olay and Old Spice. Again, they're letting the data help them make those marketing decisions about what to bundle together.
Fantastic. Especially helpful around holiday times and whatnot, where we're trying to increase that AOV, and if we have some of our top selling products, and maybe we bundle it with some others to increase that. So really, really good insight there. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, you can also have the ability to drive an increased AOV based on different thresholds. This brand did a really, really good test about trying different gifts with purchases. So you'll see that they tried, if you spend $50, you get a $10 reward in Club Olay. You get a free gift with a $35 purchase. You get a free gift with $65 purchase and $45 purchase. So they were trying to do a bunch of different tests to see where our AOV is today and how much higher can we get our consumers to spend. And it was an extremely successful test for them, and they really learned a lot of information. So along with, like we mentioned, along with doing these gifts with purchases, a lot of times brands will do maybe a tiered discount, like 10% off a $50 purchase, 20% off a $100 purchase, and so forth, just to get them to increase their basket size. Reviewing what we discussed today, we wanted to put some of these formulas back together, and we can show some of the positive and negative factors and what may have caused some of the results. So this is what Jenny had gone over at the beginning, where if you can look at your own program and see, okay, my list is growing, my engagement's growing, and so forth, but my AOV is declining. So what does that tell me, and where can I look to help resolve some of those issues? So again, we'll be sharing this with you as well, so you can have some of these examples to refer back to. In closing, we want to recap some of the topics that we covered today before we get into the Q&A. We want to define goals and create a plan to reach them. We want to know what data is available to you and where to find it. Understand the KPIs that are important to you. Measure the success of your brand based on your past performance, as well as comparing your data to some industry benchmarks. Potentially move away from a one-size-fits-all email program, and leverage the retention science platform as well as our team to help you effectively take action on your data.
Yeah, and before we move on, I really want to add how important it is to really tailor all of these things to your business. Like every brand that I look at has a different story. All their data tells different stories, and so it's really important to definitely look at industry and vertical benchmarks, but really measure your success on your own past performance and your own brand story, and really let the data tell you which way to go.
Awesome, thanks, Jenny. So we'll wait here for a few minutes to get some questions rolling in here. Oh, here's one's coming in. How can I A/B test my media spend strategies? That's a great question. Many brands, we actually had one do a really good job with this. They'll send consumers to different landing pages depending on where they're coming from. So if you're doing some Facebook ads or using Google Display Network, wherever they may be, they'll send them to a specific landing page, and then on that page they might have an opt-in form, a specific pop-up that might come from that page, and then over time you can track the lifetime value of that consumer based on which registration source that they came from. So really good question there.
Yeah, I like to say that it's like tagging a tiger, when you're out in the wild and you're like, okay, I'm going to put a little ear tag on this tiger so I know where it comes from, right? So that's kind of what we're doing here, is we're tagging them at the registration source so that we can track their performance over time.
Awesome. Let's see. Okay, here's another one coming here. On the slide where you talked about time to first purchase, what do you recommend doing to get my consumers to buy again?
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, depending on what you sell, you might want to send a follow-up email to your consumers shortly after they would have received their product in the mail. Maybe in this email, you can provide some tips or education on using the product, get them excited about what they just bought. Then maybe a few days later, set up another automated email promoting some additional product recommendations, maybe include some items that are similar to what they just purchased. It might also be a good idea if you could provide a small incentive, as maybe saying a thank you for buying, and get them to purchase again. So this goes great with that slide where we saw the, I think it was like the 26% of consumers made a purchase and 74% churned, and then we had that higher 78% churned after the first one. So whatever we can do to get that consumer to make that second purchase and really become that loyal consumer to your brand, then ideally they will continue to buy from you over and over again.
Yeah, and I also think it's important, again, as I mentioned earlier, to really look at your own data, right? So, your repurchase rate or length of time might be different than someone else's. If you sell white strips, then it might be, 6 or 7 months between repurchases, and then you need to think about another strategy. So maybe we can do bundling and gifting, or recommendations or something like that. But if we have a replenishable, then we can make ritual and repurchase part of the email communication and think about, sending right at the time when it would be, time to repurchase the item. So again, it's really about using your own product and your own brand story to figure out when to send these and using the data to back that up.
Great example. Yeah, like if you're selling food and you want to get somebody to purchase again, they would have received it in several days, and then they can try it and eat it right away, and then they would know if they liked it or not. If you're selling some kind of a skincare product that might take 2 weeks or 3 weeks before you can start to see some results, maybe you want to wait a little bit longer before sending that follow-up email to give them a chance to receive it, use it, and see if they have results from that product. Ideally, they'll have great results, and then they'll want to purchase more. If you send that email too soon, like Jenny mentioned, it might not be as relevant to them just yet. So the timing is all super important over there. Let's see if we have anything else coming in over here. Okay, one more here coming in. How does your AI help us use data to make better decisions? How does your AI help us use data to make better decisions? That's another really good question. So within the retention science platform, we have a number of kind of pre-built predicted segments. So we can identify consumers that are likely to purchase soon, or maybe which consumers are about to churn, among other things. So knowing that, we've got a number of automated lifecycle marketing stages built directly into the platform that are based on these predicted segments. So if we know that a consumer is about to churn, we might add in some more educational content. Maybe we'll talk about some of our new releases, maybe even offer some kind of a last chance discount to get them to re-engage with the brand. Conversely, if we know that they're about to purchase, we can deliver them content that's a bit more product focused, less fluff, maybe have a great CTA button that'll get them back onto the site and make that purchase. So depending on where the consumer is in their life cycle, using the data that we have in the AI based on their email activity, based on their site activity, what they're viewing, we can really get a good understanding of what life cycle stage that consumer fits into, and then send them, as we talked about at the very beginning, the right message at the right time.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, I feel like I'm really hammering this home, but it's so important, is to really think about your brand and what your brand specific needs are and what the data is telling you. I work with a really great brand that does natural remedies for fleas and ticks for cats and dogs. And their focus, as we've been looking at the data, is to really work on having our repeat customers come back, because the brand really builds a loyal customer base. And so we spend a lot of time building emails for that customer base based on the performance that we see coming out of those life cycle stages. And then we also see really great performance coming in from the very first time a consumer purchases. And so we know based on the data that those are our two hot spots. And so we really work on those. And then, the rest of the stuff we still work on, but it's important to really focus your attention on where you're seeing the results and make tweaks and experiments on that to continue to, expand on that performance. Awesome. Eric, I saw another question come in. It says, when do we know it's a good time to ask customers if they want to unsubscribe? You want to tackle that one?
Yeah, there's a couple of good list questions over in here. So when do we know it's a good time to ask customers if they want to unsubscribe? So we typically like to put in what we call a sunset policy for many of the domains. So we want to look at engagement rate by domain. So we might know that open rates on Apple or on Gmail are typically really good, but open rates on maybe Hotmail or Yahoo aren't quite as good. So we can extend out the last open or last click date with the Gmails or the Apples. Let's just say maybe 9 months, 12 months, and still try to get those consumers to re-engage. If it's a Hotmail or Yahoo, like I mentioned, where our deliverability isn't as good and we're not having the open rates as much, the ISPs are noticing that. So maybe we want to shorten the sunset policy for those domains to maybe 5 or 6 months. And then prior to basically cutting them off, maybe we send a 2 or 3 email win-back campaign to get them to re-engage. And if they do so, and they open an email, if they click, if they go back on the website, then their metrics will automatically reset. There's nothing else we'd have to do. They would fall out of that kind of churning status and get them engaged back in. If they are going over that 6-month or 9-month threshold that we just talked about, we can either unsubscribe them or we can use this sunset policy and just stop mailing to them over a certain period of time. Because if they haven't engaged with you in 9 months, you know, the likelihood of them coming back is probably pretty low.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Is you definitely want to have these win-back campaigns, you know, kind of cast a wide net. But it is important to remember that after a certain point, you might just be harming your deliverability to continue to reach out to, you know, a list that is just dormant, essentially.
The other question is kind of related. So is there an email list size threshold for when it's okay to remove the bounces and undeliverables? I'd say immediate. So there's never a bad time to remove an undeliverable address. The only thing it's going to do is cause harm to your list. So if you know that email addresses are bouncing because it's either an improperly formatted email address or it's just a bad address altogether, if you continue to send to those addresses, the ISPs notice. They know, you know, they're watching, they're seeing what you're doing. And so if your open rates and they're seeing higher bounces and blocks, they're going to think that you aren't running a legitimate email program and you're not cleaning up, you're not performing the proper list hygiene methods and so forth. And so they're going to ding your deliverability, and that's going to affect everything, and you're going to start to get into the inbox less. So great question, and super, super important to make sure that your list is clean as often as possible.
Yeah, you just kind of want to picture, like, you don't want to go too long between doing your laundry, right? So same thing with this list. You want to figure out a cadence that works for you for when you look at all these bounces and undeliverables and really clean them out of your list to keep it looking really good for Yahoo and Gmail and all these other inboxes.
One last question I see here, and I hope I can answer this one properly. So it says, how do you forecast the revenue and correlate it to repeat purchase rate? So within our platform, as one of the slides that Jenny showed, she showed how many non-purchasers, purchasers 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. So we can build out some segments that'll show, okay, here are the number of 2-time purchasers, and then we can also correlate the amount of revenue that goes with those 2-time purchasers, so we can see, you know, is the lifetime value for these consumers higher or lower than consumers that have purchased 1 time, and so forth. Really, really good questions today. Thanks everybody for. I know it's kind of a one-way discussion, but at least we had some really good questions and some good stuff here. We're going to wrap it up here. Definitely feel free to contact us if your question didn't get answered, and check out our blog for more content. We thank you again for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.